Okay, Rugby Australia are in the news. They've announced losses of 36.8 million Australian dollars. But Rugby Australia and rugby in Australia has been in trouble for quite some time. So it should come as no surprise that the game is losing money massively. Now, the running costs of the Brumbies and the Warratahs has climbed considerably in recent years, reaching a really bad peak last year. And of course, we saw the collapse of the Melbourne Rebels quite catastrophically at the end of last year's Super Rugby season. So there's now only four Super Rugby franchises down under rather than five. Now, some say the collapse of the Melbourne Rebels has actually aided the Wallabies a little bit, so the talent is less spread around five teams, and that the Super Rugby franchises in Australia are performing better, especially the Queensland Reds and the Western Force really improving quite considerably. But the collapse of the Melbourne Rebels is a worrying sign for rugby union in Australia, considering that the AFL and NRL are in expansion mode and growing their footprint domestically in Australia. Now, the chairman, Daniel Herbert, and the president, Joe Roth, of Rugby Australia are blaming the performance, or the poor performance, should we say, of the Wallabies at the 2023 World Cup. And, of course, that ongoing uncertainty surrounding the Super Rugby Pacific, as it's now known, with the collapse of the Melbourne Rebels and those related running costs for the Brumbies and the Warratahs. The current TV deal has been and media rights deal has been roundly criticised by sports fans in Australia for basically hiding the sport behind a paywall on Stan and not being on free-to-air coverage. Now, they do have a new TV deal coming with Channel 9 that is worth approximately 240 million Australian dollars. Now, is this too little too late? Yes, it's an injection of fresh money and a new broadcast partner with Channel 9, but a lot of people, a lot of sports fans in Australia feel that the Wallabies and rugby union is losing relevance and has lost a lot of fans because of the current TV deal and putting it all behind a paywall on Stan. A lot of people were critical of taking it off Foxtel and free to air and KO Sports and making it less accessible. I think that has potentially contributed to fans switching off. Now, so we'll see how that TV deal with Channel 9, how that helps. But they're also praying that every available ticket for the upcoming Lions tour, which is they put 500,000 tickets up for sale, gets sold. They are hoping that ticket sales for the Lions tour later this year are strong. And they're hoping as many, if not all, of the tickets get sold and that stadiums are at capacity, because that is a big thing that they're banking on. They're banking on a successful Lions tour financially. They're also banking on the future Men's World Cup in 2027, where Australia hosts, and 2029 for the Women's World Cup. They're praying that both those tournaments' ticket sales are strong, and that also the Wallabies play well. Now, performances with the Wallabies have improved under Joe Schmidt. However, it was an expensive failure hiring Eddie Jones the second time round. He didn't see out his contract, and they continue to try and improve their standing in world rugby by hiring mercenary rugby league players. And you have to question, with the losses mounting, admittedly, with upcoming TV contracts and ticket sales hopefully mitigating and paying off some of those losses and turning those losses into profits, how they can continue to justify giving out $1 million contracts to players like Joseph Suaalii, for example, and Semi Radradra. And this has been a trend that Rugby Australia has been following for a long time, is paying far too much money for rugby league talent to fill the gaps in their talent pool, where the domestic game is not producing the talent required. Now, they're blaming nations like France, for example, poaching their youth talent. But what is a noticeable trend is over many, many years, AFL and NRL have also been poaching talent domestically. But the governing body, Rugby Australia, is trying to point the finger at France for luring young players away with the prospect of Test rugby. And there are a lot of overseas players in the French system. Australia is guilty of this themselves with the Pacific Islander nations. If you look at the makeup of the Wallabies, for example, there's a lot of players of Fijian, Samoan and Tongan heritage who actually could be playing for Fiji, Tonga or Samoa. at test level. So Australia are not blameless in the let's poach the overseas talent, but they're blaming France for a lot of their talent issues. But they're not looking in their own backyard when the NRL and the AFL are recruiting talent in large numbers with the offers of player development, good contracts, and better pathways. Simple. Now, they also have an $80 million loan to pay back to Pacific Equity Partners. They actually had to take out an emergency loan from an outside investment. They're getting close to paying that off, but it's still worrying that they needed to reach out for private equity investment to help with their finances. Now, the last time I really looked into Rugby Australia was when Ryling Castle was in charge and the whole Israel Folau saga, which rumbled on over a couple of years between 2018 and 2019 pre-COVID. That became very, very expensive back in the day for Rugby Australia with lawsuits and lost sponsorship deals and a lot of negative press. It was very, very damaging for the reputation of Rugby Australia. And this is at a time when Super Rugby in its old traditional format was struggling and Western Force were struggling. And the amount of money Western Force needed just to get them through the following season was roughly the same amount of money that Israel Folau was due to be paid under his Wallabies contract. And there was a lot of people saying, why give all this money to one player when you want to invest in the grassroots game and player development and the wider sport nationwide? And obviously that ended up biting them in the arse quite badly because Israel Folau basically got sacked in the end, but there was a lot of legal fees. It was very, very expensive in regards to lawsuits, and major sponsors like Qantas got the cold feet and withdrew their sponsorship of the handling. And ultimately Ryling Castle lost her job, but it left a bitter taste in the mouth. COVID didn't help. And while they're saying now participation levels are back up to pre-COVID levels and growth in regards to participation are back up, I think the damage has been done historically by that lack of visibility on the domestic TV market in regards to having it behind a paywall, no free-to-air coverage. The quality level of the domestic Sheep Shield competition is not great. And you can't just blame France for pinching all the youth talent because, the NRL and AFL are really expanding their footprint at grassroots level, and the NRL is in expansion mode, the AFL is in expansion mode. They're rapidly growing, and their TV audiences and ticket sales and participation levels back up the fact that rugby league and Aussie rules as sports domestically in Australia are in a much healthier state. The growth of the women's game in both AFL and NRL as well, so there's female participation is up. And then you still have to ask questions of the fact that Rugby Australia continues to try and lure rugby league talent over, and AFL talent for that matter, with the promise of these big $1 million contracts which it cannot afford. And that is something that they're refusing to acknowledge, is they're paying over the odds for rugby league talent, essentially. We'll use Suoliti as the example lately, to try and keep the Wallabies as competitive in the test arena as possible, because they're not developing homegrown rugby union talent effectively, and they haven't been doing that effectively for 20 years. So there's a lot of things at play. They are relying on future prospective ticket sales and interest in regards to the Lions Tour and the upcoming Men's and Women's World Cups to aid them financially. But let's say those tickets don't sell. Let's say attendances at stadiums are poor. Let's say they don't do well at the 2027 World Cup or for the men, or the 2029 Women's World Cup. They don't make the latter stages. Let's say the world's economy continues to stutter and people have less money to spend. They are banking on a lot of unknowns in the future. But there we go. There's the state of rugby union in Australia. Money is a concern. Now, the new TV deal will help. Paying off the loan back to Pacific Equity Partners will help. But they are relying on the fact that they have a successful Lions Tour financially, and the Men's and Women's World Cups are successful financially. And that's a big what if, because of cost of living crisis, the uncertainties with the global economy. They are taking a lot of risks on matches that haven't been played yet and tournaments that haven't taken place yet. So we shall see what happens, but Rugby Australia is not in the best of positions, and a lot of fans have had a lot to say about it. And while participation levels are slowly climbing again to pre-COVID levels, they're still lagging behind where domestic rivals like the NRL and AFL are at. So there we go. Thank you very much for watching. Place your thoughts in the comment section below on the whole situation with Rugby Australia. But for me, for now, it is goodbye. I will have some more content for you all very, very soon. And bye for now.